It started with a group text from Becca. Family meeting tonight, 7 p.m. in the kitchen. Family, there were only 3 of us in this house, and only one of us paid to keep it standing. I didn't reply. Just put on a pot of coffee and set 3 mugs out like it was any other evening. Nolan came down first, already wearing that rehearsed half smile. Becca followed, holding her phone like a presentation clicker. They didn't sit. That was my first clue. "We've been talking," Becca began, voice chipper. "Too bright, and we think it's time to discuss contributions." Contributions. I repeated more to my coffee than to her. Nolan stepped in like they'd practiced it. "You've been living here rent-free, Mom, and we're happy to have you, but we think it's only fair that you start pitching in." Becca. Knotted lips, pressed tight. "Just half your pension. That's all." I looked up slowly. Becca leaned on the counter, like she owned it. Nolan couldn't meet my eyes. "My pension." I said, "Right." Becca said, "You're not paying rent. You don't cover groceries. You use the utilities. We're not trying to be mean. It's just fair. This house, the one with the chipped window, Nolan broke when he was 12. The creaky step he used to sneak past at night stood because I worked 33 years in education and never missed a mortgage payment. The bedroom. They slept in painted with the same color. I picked when I thought I'd grow old in peace. I set my coffee down gently. The sound echoed in the silence. "If we're going to be fair," I said, "then we should start with the deed." Becca blinked. "What?" "The deed." I repeated. "You want half of what comes in. Let's talk about who owns what we're standing in." Nolan cleared his throat. "We're just trying to help manage things better." I smiled. "Not the warm kind, the kind that comes before a storm." "Well," then I said, "we'll manage it properly." And I stood, because standing makes people listen harder. I was 28 when the doctor said aneurysm like it was a traffic report. My husband was dead before I made it to the hospital. Nolan was 5. He slept through the night, not knowing the world had shifted under our feet. The insurance payout wasn't much, and grief doesn't pause the bills. I went back to work that Monday, assistant registrar at the local high school. Long hours, tight budget. No room for error. But I learned how to stretch $1 until it begged for mercy. I made lunches from scratch-patched. Nolan's jacket skipped vacations for years. I saved every extra paycheck, every state refund, every tutoring stipend. This house, the one with the uneven driveway and the sunroom that leaks every other spring, was mine by the time Nolan turned 25. No help, no second income, just slow, stubborn perseverance. When Nolan called last year and said he'd lost his job, I didn't hesitate. "Of course, you can come home, Becca, too. You just need a few months to get back on your feet." I meant it, and I believed it. They moved in with 5 boxes, 2 laptops, and more complaints than gratitude at first. I didn't mind Becca talked a lot, but she cleaned. Nolan offered to mow the lawn once I told myself they were adjusting. Then months passed. Becca started calling the guest room our room. Nolan started leaving dishes in the sink, like I'd always been the housekeeper. Their resumes gathered dust, their bills unpaid. They bought takeout and concert tickets, but never offered money for electricity. 14 months later, and I still haven't seen them buy a single roll of toilet paper. They talk about the future like I'm not in it when we repaint the kitchen, when we refinish the floors. I never gave them a key. Nolan copied one anyway. I stood in that kitchen after they went to bed and looked at the framed photo over the sink. Nolan, 6 years old, holding a hammer and smiling next to the first wall. I ever patched myself. They don't know whose house they're standing in, but they're about to looking back. It wasn't one moment. It was a string of them. Quiet things, easy to brush off if you wanted to. Becca had started asking questions months ago. Harmless at first. How does your pension get deposited? Is it fixed or adjusted for inflation? Do you have a beneficiary listed? I chalked it up to curiosity. She liked to play smart. Always had a podcast on in the background, always quoting someone else's opinion like it was gospel. I humored her. Then came Nolan. He started helping with the mail, picking it up before I could, sorting it, tossing envelopes. He said we're junk. I caught a bank statement once half torn, stuffed under a cereal box in the trash. When I asked him about it, he smiled like I'd imagined the whole thing just another credit card offer, Mom. I wanted to believe him, but then the whispering started behind closed doors late at night. I'd walk past their room and hear hushed tones, stops and starts, words like timeline transfer get ahead of it. Still, I waited. Waited for something that couldn't be explained away. It came on a Tuesday night. I couldn't sleep. The wind had kicked up and the branches outside my window scraped like fingers on glass. I got up to make tea, and as I passed the stairwell, I heard Becca's voice. Once we get the deed, she said, we'll talk to that memory care place, the one in Lakeview. It's clean, and they let you tour the rooms. I response. I didn't catch it. I didn't need to memory care, not retirement. Not downsizing. They were planning where to send me after they got my house. I went back to bed and lay flat, eyes open to the ceiling, hearing every tick of the clock like a countdown the next morning. I got dressed, like normal, smiled when Becca handed me my mail. Poured myself a cup of coffee and I called my lawyer the next morning. I told them I had an early appointment. Becca barely looked up from her phone. Nolan grunted something that passed as acknowledgement. They didn't ask where I was going. They never do. My lawyer's office is 20 minutes away, tucked between a coffee shop and a dry cleaner. I hadn't been there in almost 2 years. Not since I set up the initial trust back then. I still believed in fairness. Still thought Nolan just needed time to grow into his role as a man. I sat across from Marianne, my attorney, and told her plainly, take him out. She didn't flinch. She just nodded and opened the file. Do you want to add anyone else in his place? No, I said. I'm not in a giving mood. She smiled softly and got to work. We updated the revocable trust. I remained the sole trustee and beneficiary. No transfer on death. No survivorship clause. Nothing that could be twisted later. Then we went further. The house, the pension, the investments locked under my name with specific restrictions, no co-signers, no family claims. If something happened to me, everything would go to a private scholarship fund I had once donated to under a different name. It was cleaner that way. Easier to protect. It took an hour. No dramatics. No what-ifs. Just signatures and stamps and a strange cold peace that settled in my chest like winter air. When it was done, Marianne looked at me. You don't want to notify them? No, I said, not yet. I drove home slow, watching the trees blur past the window. When I pulled into the driveway, Nolan's car was gone. Becca's sandals were by the door. Laundry was overflowing in the hall basket. The house smelled faintly of burnt toast and lavender cleaner. Hers, not mine. I folded the new documents into a locked drawer. Then I poured myself another cup of coffee. Let them keep thinking they're in control. Let them keep whispering about deeds and future plans. I was done reacting now. I was preparing dinner, was unusually quiet that night. No passive-aggressive comments from Becca. No loud chewing from Nolan. Just the clink of forks and the hum of the dishwasher in the background. Halfway through, Nolan cleared his throat and said, Hey, Mom, there's this thing I read about some kind of deed transfer that helps with taxes. Like if the house is in your name, but meant for family, you can sign a simple form and it saves everybody trouble later. Becca didn't even try to pretend it was casual. She kept her eyes on me like she was waiting for a tell. I wiped my mouth, took a slow sip of water, and nodded. "You should send me the article." He smiled like he just won something. Later that night, while they were both upstairs, I walked into my office to grab a pen. The drawer where I kept my files wasn't open, but it wasn't closed either. Just enough to make me stop, I pulled it out slowly. The folder with my updated trust was still there, but misaligned, the edges weren't flush the way I always left them. Then I noticed the safe. It's small, old, nothing fancy, but I know how I leave it. The lock was turned one notch off, not closed tight, not locked at all. I opened it. Nothing missing, but something had been touched. I turned toward the kitchen. My coffee shelf, neat by habit, was shuffled. One of the canisters was backward. Another had its lid askew. I stood there in the silence of my own home and realized they'd been everywhere, not just snooping, searching, looking for something they thought they were entitled to. I stood there a long time. Before I turned out the light that night, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed listening to the stairs creak as Nolan went down for something, probably a snack. Maybe another look. I didn't stop him. Let him dig. Let him dig until he finds out what it costs to underestimate me. They left on a Friday afternoon. Becca shouted something about traffic and leaving before the storm hits. Nolan grabbed a duffel bag and barely said goodbye. The door slammed behind them. I waited 10 minutes just to be sure, then I got to work. The locksmith arrived at 2:15 by 2:45. The front, back, and side doors all had new locks. I handed him cash and didn't offer an explanation. He didn't ask for one. By 4:00, I had boxed up everything that wasn't mine. Clothes, electronics, kitchen gadgets. They never used but insisted on keeping. I stacked it all in the garage, neatly under a plastic tarp with 2 bricks on top. Becca's name was written on one box in thick black marker. Nolan's was scratched into a cooler lid. Nothing damaged, nothing tossed, just moved. Then came the paperwork. The first envelope contained a notarized 30-day eviction notice. The second held a spreadsheet I'd printed from my old budgeting software. Every mortgage payment, grocery run, plumbing repair, and utility bill I'd covered in the past 14 months. Their names weren't listed. Once I sealed both envelopes and placed them in the mailbox by the curb, it clicked shut with a sound that felt final back inside. I brewed fresh coffee, the kind I liked, the good beans. I kept hidden behind the flour. I sat in my usual chair by the window, feet tucked under me, like I used to do when Nolan was small and sick and slept on the couch. The wind picked up around sunset. Leaves tumbled across the porch in crooked lines. The house was quiet in the right way again. No blaring podcasts, no arguments over takeout orders, no fake laughter echoing from rooms. They never cleaned, just wood air. Steam rising from a real mug. They thought they were carving out a future here, but all they'd done was wear out their welcome, and now I was ready to show them the difference between living in a house and owning it. They came back just after 10. I watched from the upstairs window as they tried the door, pulled at it, then turned toward each other in confusion. Becca pounded once. Nolan pulled out his phone. I finished brushing my teeth. I had 3 missed calls and 7 texts from Becca. By midnight, the number had jumped to 17. "What the hell, Odalyn? This is illegal. We're calling a lawyer. You better undo this before we come back with cops." I didn't reply at 6:13 a.m. Nolan emailed me a PDF with the subject line proof of shared ownership. Attached was a forged gift agreement, typed sloppily, formatted and dated 6 months ago. It claimed I had willingly transferred 50% of the property to them. My name was signed at the bottom in a version of my handwriting that looked like someone copied it off a birthday card. I stared at it for a full minute. Not out of shock, but out of calculation. They thought I'd panic. Instead, I opened a new tab and forwarded the email to Marianne. My lawyer, subject line, fraudulent document attached. Her reply came back within 20 minutes. Do not respond. File police report immediately, so I did. I walked into the station, handed the printout to the officer at the front desk, and said, "My son forged my signature in an attempt to claim legal ownership of my house." They didn't brush me off. They took copies, asked questions, wrote everything down. No yelling, no threats, no drama, just facts, dates, evidence. Back home, I made another cup of coffee, sat in the quiet. The text notifications kept flashing, but I left my phone on the counter. I didn't need to fight. I just needed a record. They had crossed the line, but they weren't ready for what happens when you try to rewrite history, and the woman you're stealing from kept every receipt. The voicemail came from my bank's fraud department. Calm voice, polite tone. "Ms. Mercer, we're calling to confirm a refinancing application submitted using your property address. We noticed some irregularities and wanted to verify you initiated the request. I called back immediately." The woman on the line was efficient. It was submitted online under your name, with your address and partial social security number. But the email listed belongs to a nmercer.financeagmail.com. "Is that, I said flatly. "That's my son." There was a pause. Then she said, "We've already flagged it. You won't be held responsible, but we recommend filing a formal report." I thanked her, hung up, and felt the first flicker of something colder than anger calculation. An hour later, I received a certified letter in the mail. The return address wasn't familiar inside a filled-out power of attorney request. Becca had submitted it through a county clerk's office, claiming I was showing signs of cognitive decline. She'd even attached a physician's note. I read the signature twice. It was from Dr. Liana Whitaker. Becca's cousin she'd come to dinner once 6 months ago said barely a word, and now apparently believed I wasn't competent to manage my own life. They weren't just trying to take the house, they were trying to take me the next morning. I walked into the same police station as before and filed my second report, this time for attempted legal manipulation and falsified medical documentation. The officer raised his eyebrows when he read the doctor's name, "Related to the woman you're evicting cousin." I said, "Nice, right?" He nodded and stamped the forms. Back home. I changed the locks to my filing cabinet, hid the originals of every legal document in a new location, updated passwords, alerted my lawyer, froze credit reports. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a takeover attempt, slow, deliberate, and dressed in family smiles. But they underestimated something critical. You can lie about someone's memory. You can even forge their signature, but you can't erase the clarity of a woman who's already one step ahead. I texted them Sunday morning dinner, 6 p.m., just the three of us beyond time. Becca replied with a thumbs up. Nolan didn't answer. They arrived 5 minutes late. Becca wore too much perfume. Nolan looked like he hadn't slept in days. The dining room table was set for 3, but there was no food, no wine, no silverware, just 2 manila folders in the center, perfectly aligned. Becca raised an eyebrow. "What is this?" I gestured toward the chairs. "Have a seat." They sat. Nolan looked nervous. Becca looked bored. I opened the first folder and slid it toward them. "This is a restraining order already signed and filed. It prevents you from entering this property or contacting me directly." Becca scoffed. "Are you serious?" I didn't answer. I opened the second folder. "This is a civil fraud complaint for document forgery, attempted identity theft, and abuse of fiduciary trust." Nolan's face drained of color. Becca stood up. "You're unbelievable," she snapped. "After everything we've done for you, this is how you treat us." I looked up at her calmly. "Everything you've done to me? Not for me. You're just a bitter, lonely witch," she hissed. I smiled. "And you're trespassing." She froze. I reached behind me and pressed play on the small voice recorder I'd placed earlier. Becca's voice echoed through the room. "Once we get the deed, we'll talk to that memory care place." Nolan closed his eyes. "I suggest you both leave now," I said, "and don't come back unless you're ready to face this in court." Becca grabbed her purse. Nolan followed her silent eyes on the ground. Neither of them looked back. I waited until I heard the front gate click shut. Then I gathered the two folders, placed them in my safe, and poured myself a fresh cup of coffee. By the time I sat down in my chair, the house had returned to stillness. But this time, it wasn't fear that filled the silence. It was something sharper, firmer, and it was mine. The house stayed quiet after they left. No more slammed doors, no podcast voices echoing through walls, no footsteps at midnight, pretending not to raid the fridge, just me. I changed the curtains in the guest room first. The ones Becca had picked out, too loud, too cheap, went straight into a donation box. I repainted the walls with a color I liked, not trendy, just soft, quiet. Mine word got around fast. Becca posted a vague message online about betrayal and ageism. I didn't read the comments. Nolan moved in with Becca's brother, who apparently didn't know he was coming until the bags hit the floor. He called me once, trying to clear the air. I let it ring. Some bridges aren't worth saving. Some never were. I kept the deed in a fireproof box now. The trust updated and sealed my pension deposits, rerouted to a new bank under a new name. The garden started to bloom again, even though I'd nearly let it die last spring. Funny how things recover when they're no longer being trampled on. I had my coffee on the back porch most mornings, stronger than before, hotter. I stopped diluting it with cream like I used to when I worried about sharing it. I drank it black like my patients. Neighbors waved. The mailman learned my name. I started baking again, small batches for no one in particular, just for the smell. Just because I could. I didn't miss them. Not the noise, not the entitlement, not the slow unraveling of my own space beneath someone else's assumptions. The locks stayed changed. The trust stayed filed. The peace stayed put. And the silence. It didn't ache anymore. It's saying,